Thank you. Can a minister take money from a lobby group, say the gambling sector, and still be trusted to make decisions in the interests of the community?
I think she means you, Michelle Rowland.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the question. And up front, I want to acknowledge that transparency and accountability is important to Australians. And Australians always expect better when it comes to this area, even when no rules have been broken. And I respect that, and I think that that is a reasonable position to hold.
So do you now say it was wrong to take the money from Sportsbet, $19,000 in donations from Sportsbet?
What I'm saying is, whilst this was compliant with all the rules, I appreciate that there need to be different levels of accountability and that there's different and community views on this matter. But also, I think this highlights one very important aspect, and that is about disclosure of political donations. I think that this is an area of long overdue reform, and the Albanese government has had a long-held position, for example, of decreasing the disclosure threshold, so it is a lower amount that needs to be disclosed, but also having real-time reporting. And if this conversation encourages that to be sped up and we get results in that, then I think that is a good thing, and I'll be participating in that discussion.
If you feel that way now, why didn't you feel that way then when you were taking the $19,000 from Sportsbet?
Well, my answer stands. And what I would also point out, because you go to a very important question about how a minister's judged. Ministers and governments are judged on delivery. And myself in opposition and now in government, and the government itself once in opposition, has a very strong track record when it comes to the fundamental issue of where governments regulate in this area, and that's on harm minimisation. I would point out that the most fundamental change to the regulatory system, one that has been talked about since 2015, which is a national self-exclusion register, so people who are vulnerable with one touch can actually exclude themselves, will be proclaimed under me as Minister. We are pushing ahead with this.
I understand you didn't declare the donations that was exposed through Sportsbet's financial records, and so we don't know from the time that you were elected till now what decisions you've made based on that donation. So when you're talking about disclosure, you didn't disclose this, and we don't know what decisions you have made that have been influenced by that. So, you know, the issue of trust in who you are actually representing. Are you representing Sportsbet or are you representing the community?
I respect the question and all aspects of it, and I'll answer them in turn. The first is that governments, as I said, are judged on their record. The disclosure rules, as they exist at any point in time, have always been complied with by myself, including disclosures to the Parliament and the Ministerial Code of Conduct. But you make an excellent point in terms of how are we to judge that. And I ask that you judge that on the evidence. The evidence is that we have had a strong track record on harm minimisation, supporting the establishment of a national consumer protection framework. Next month, new advertising taglines come into place. I will be the minister responsible for turning on the first self-exclusion register that will apply nationally and apply to all of those platforms. But there's three other very important points that we have in the pipeline, and they've been talked about for a long time but not acted on. The first is in terms of credit card betting, which we are looking at very closely and which I will lead as Minister for reform in this area, not only because the evidence is there, but we will ensure that harm minimisation always remains paramount. The second is a long overdue response to the review of classification. Currently, there are games that have loot boxes or simulated like gambling that are not regulated. And clearly, this is an area of concern for many parents and vulnerable children.
Can I just come in and just get a very quick answer to this question? I want to just go back to Rhonda very quickly and then go to the other panel. From now on, will you not accept money from gambling companies?
I will not take money from Sportsbet, and I look forward to the outcomes.
Any gambling companies?
I haven't taken, as I said...
In the future?
As I said, I'm now the Minister. I will not be taking money from Sportsbet.
Can I ask, will you meet with the Gambling Reform Alliance? I understand that you've refused to meet with Peter Scott Costello.
I have met with the Gambling Reform Alliance, and we had a very productive discussion about where they can fit into the regulatory regime and reform in this area.
Rhonda, thanks for your question. I understand you're a Greens councillor as well from Dandenong, and this issue is very close to you.
In my community, $150 million comes out of our community every year. We're the poorest LGA in the state. That money is coming off the table of literally off the children in our area.
David Coleman, the coalition as well took money from Sportsbet, over $100,000 at the last election as well. So if you're talking about a situation here, it could equally be yourself sitting where Michelle Rowland is, isn't it? If your parties are taking money from gambling companies.
Well, the key, the key issue, Stan, is that everyone's got to comply with the rules, and there are very detailed rules around disclosure, around funding for the political parties, and ministerial disclosures, as the Minister mentioned.
But that's not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about here potentially being compromised by big gambling that are putting money into political companies. Are you prepared to say right now, as Michelle Rowland said tonight, that you wouldn't be taking any future funds from gambling companies?
Well, look, Stan, I mean, we follow the rules. There's a review, actually, of the donation rules happening right now under the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters.
So you'd be happy taking money from Sportsbet?
Well, Stan, I think what we should do is allow that committee to do its reviews, and it'll come back and make recommendations. And the government, just to be clear, Stan, the government hasn't changed the laws. The Minister's made a statement just here, but the laws are exactly the same today as they were yesterday. So the Minister's basically saying that something that wasn't okay a few weeks ago for her that was okay a few weeks ago is not okay today. I think the better way and the orderly way to do it is to say, let's look at the rules overall, which is what the committee is doing. It's then a matter for the government to say, what does the government think the law of Australia should be? And then the opposition will have a view. And I think that's the way.
I want to go to Jelena Dokic. As someone who works in sports commentary, you've worked in sport as well. Are you concerned about the increasing influence of sports gambling online companies, particularly the advertising of sports gambling as well?
Look, it's been something that we've talked about in tennis as well now for a couple of years, and especially in the last few years, there's been a lot. And I think for me, I think companies perhaps working with the governing bodies to help with players and with sports people as well, because there's been a lot. Players have, thrown matches and a lot has happened, and we've had actually quite a few players where they've gotten life bans, where they can't ever be in tennis again, not even work in tennis, and we've had that happen quite a bit over the last 5 years, and the governing bodies in tennis have done a lot to help players as well, because it's gotten to a point where, there's been life threats if you don't do certain things and if you don't, perform the way that they want you to, and it got really messy and it got really dangerous. So I think it's more about, I'm looking at it from a sports person's perspective, and I was in the sport for a very long time, and while a lot of that was going on, I think it's about the safety at the end of the day of sports people and athletes, and how can maybe those companies actually work with athletes, with the governing bodies in certain countries, but also our worldwide governing bodies, the WTA and the ATP, to actually prevent a lot of this happening.